The primary reason we're here is to speak with you about the mid-year economic and fiscal outlook. This is a responsible set of books which reflects the very substantial progress that we have made cleaning up the budget. 2 surpluses in the first 2 years, a smaller deficit this year, and then even with some slippage in subsequent years, a $200 billion improvement in the budget position since we were elected, which means much less debt for Australians to repay. The deficit for this year is now $1.3 billion smaller since the budget, and it's now almost half what we inherited for this year, which is about $20 billion smaller than what it was in the pre-election fiscal outlook. The budget position over the 4 years is $27.1 billion better over the next 4 years compared to the outlook in the pre-election document. And despite all of the pressures in our budget, we are on track for a soft landing in our economy. And you can see that right across the economic indicators that we are talking about today. The economy is growing, but slowly. Inflation is moderating. Real wages and real incomes are growing. Unemployment is low. 1 million jobs have been created. Participation is around record highs. The gender pay gap has narrowed. Tax cuts and cost of living help is rolling out. There's now a $200 billion improvement in the budget, and that means $177 billion less debt and $70 billion less interest repayments over the course of the next decade or so. So we've struck the right balances in our economic strategy and in the budget update today. We've maintained a primary focus on inflation and the cost of living without ignoring our broader responsibilities to people when it comes to Medicare and medicines and pensions and the like, and also without ignoring the very substantial risks to growth. We need to remember in the international context that most of the OECD has had a negative quarter of growth. We have escaped a negative quarter of growth to date. Our gross debt position is a fraction of what we see in comparable countries, and our budget improvement since 2021 has been much faster than the average of advanced economies and the specific comparison with the economies that we usually refer to. And so we have made a lot of progress, and you can see that progress in the document today. Even with a little bit of slippage in some of the years, a $200 billion turnaround since we were elected is the biggest nominal consolidation in the budget on record. And we've managed to get the deficit for this year a little bit smaller as well, but much smaller than was anticipated a couple of years ago. So we've made room for pressures and for priorities with all of the savings that we've made, $92 billion of them by banking revenue, by showing spending restraint. And Katie's going to take us through some of those issues, and then I'll come back and cover off on a couple of other things. Thanks, Katie.
Thanks, Jim. Well, as Jim said, this budget continues the approach we've taken since coming to government. So we've looked to find savings where we can. We're dealing with those unavoidable spending pressures that we see, dealing with some of those terminating programs, showing restraint at the same time, and delivering the biggest budget turnaround in a parliamentary term due to our fiscal strategy. So our spending restraint has seen real spending growth average 1.5% over the 6 years to 27-28, which is less than half of the 30-year average, which is 3.2%, and around 1/3 of the former government's average at 4.1%. We've identified those savings we talked about yesterday, $14.6 billion in savings reprioritisations in this budget update, bringing to a total $92 billion since PFO. And we've banked 78% of revenue upgrades since the election. When you compare that to the former governments of about 40%, you can see the significant increase there, and that, of course, has impacted on our ability to deliver 2 surpluses. This means that the budget position is $200 billion better off compared to what it was under the Liberal government at PFO, despite having to find $48 billion on unavoidable spending pressures since the election and the need to provide that essential cost of living relief to Australians under pressure. The better budget position means less debt, less interest costs. As Jim outlined, gross debt $177 billion less than what we inherited, helping avoid around $70 billion in interest costs over a decade. And whilst the budget position is $1.3 billion better off than forecast at budget, the slippage across the forward estimates is really down to urgent, unavoidable or automatic spending. So unavoidable spending is half of those net decisions in MYEFO, around $8.8 billion, medicines, infrastructure cost pressures, dealing with some of those terminating programs we talked about, and then $16.3 billion in payment variations, so pensions indexations, veterans accessing the payments that they deserve because of the investments that we've made under the leadership of Minister Keogh to get those claims being processed sooner, natural disasters, schools, Medicare, more people claiming on the MBS, which is good when you consider people's access to GP and primary care services, PBS, medicines, childcare. So again, our investments in childcare, early education and care, we can see running through this MYEFO as well, with more children in care. Now, I just want to make a few comments about women, because we've really put women at the centre of our economic strategy since coming to government, and I may not get a question about it during the press conference. But I really want to thank and acknowledge the leadership of the Prime Minister and the Treasurer in ensuring that we do have women at the centre of our economic policy, that we're thinking about that all the time, and whether it be through appointments, such as the ones the Treasurer made to the Reserve Bank boards this week, but also into women's wages, to women's safety, and to the way we approach and value the care economy, which again is quite different to our predecessors. But you'll see that continue in this budget update, and we're also seeing the progress from making those investments. So you'll see more investments in women's safety, in the significant additional investment into making childcare or early education and care universal, the investment in wages for those predominantly feminised industries. Even if you look at fee-free TAFE, where 62% of the people using free TAFE under that program are women, even the HECS arrangements, where we know that women hold 61% of the debts. But if I could just briefly talk, we've got the lowest gender pay gap on record, again predominantly down to the fact we've invested in wages in the aged care sector, and because of the investments in early education and care, we expect to see that trend continue. Women's participation in the labour market reached a record high in September, and over 500,000 of the jobs that have been created during our term in government have gone to women. And again, we're seeing hundreds of thousands of more children in care, meaning that the early education and care system is working for both children and for parents, and predominantly women who picked up those caring responsibilities. So thank you for just letting me say that. But whilst, just to conclude, whilst we're getting the budget in better shape, we're delivering that cost of living relief and, importantly, improving services to the community, which you can see flow through in those parameter variations today. This has been, an important and difficult balancing act in many ways. A lot of pressures, a lot of requests for additional support, and we're trying to find room for all of those important investments while finding savings and reusing money where we can at the same time. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Katie. Just a couple of issues before we take a bunch of your questions. The first one is about the outcome achieved by the Qantas workers. The government really welcomes the result and the outcome achieved by the Qantas workers and their union, the Transport Workers Union. This will be a huge relief for all of those workers who are impacted by this, particularly as we get closer and closer to Christmas. I did want to pay tribute to the TWU for the way that they have been dogged and determined to get this outcome for the workers that we all represent. And I wanted to remind you that the aviation sector is one of the main reasons, the main motivations for our same job, same pay policy. We want to close the labour hire loophole, because we want people working in aviation and in sectors like it to have job security and decent pay. Our political opponents, Peter Dutton, has said that he will wind back the same job, same pay arrangements. He will reopen the labour hire loophole. And that means workers like these workers would be worse off, their jobs would be less secure, and they'd be paid less to do them. The last issue I wanted to touch on before your questions is around nuclear and the comments from the Deputy Premier of Queensland in the last little while. Now, the Deputy Premier of Queensland and I are from different sides of the political fence, but I think what he said in the last little while makes a lot of sense. Queenslanders don't want to be anywhere near Peter Dutton's nuclear meltdown. Queenslanders do not want a bar of the economic insanity which is Peter Dutton's nuclear fantasy. And the fact that a state LNP government from the same political party and the same state as Peter Dutton has completely repudiated and completely rejected Peter Dutton's nuclear fantasy shows just how mad it is what he is proposing. And if you think about the last day, two important things have happened. The LNP in Queensland have said no way to nuclear in Queensland. That's the most recent thing. And before that, Peter Dutton either deliberately lied or he had absolutely no idea about his own modelling of his only policy. He said yesterday that in the frontier modelling, prices for electricity will go down by 44%. That is a complete lie, or it's an absolutely humiliating mistake because the frontier modelling doesn't model prices. That's one of the flaws. The reason why he won't come clean of the impact on nuclear on power prices is because Peter Dutton will push energy prices up, not down, and that's because he's gone for the most expensive form of new energy.